Flying should be simple. Show up, sit down, don't bother anyone, and arrive at your destination. But some passengers manage to turn routine flights into chaos that requires security intervention, emergency landings, and federal investigations. Here are 45 airplane passenger incidents that prove sometimes the biggest threat to on-time arrivals isn't weather, it's the people in seat 14B. 1. A passenger tried to open the airplane door mid-flight because he needed some fresh air and couldn't understand why the windows didn't open like in his car. Flight attendants had to physically restrain him, while he argued that the plane felt stuffy and insisted that just a crack wouldn't hurt anyone. The flight was diverted for an emergency landing, and he was arrested while still complaining about the poor ventilation. 2. A woman brought her emotional support peacock to the airport, complete with a ticket she'd purchased for the bird and a leash made of Christmas lights. When gate agents explained that peacocks weren't approved emotional support animals, she demanded to speak to the head of animal resources and held up boarding for 2 hours while arguing that her peacock was more well-behaved than most passengers. 3. A man became convinced that the flight attendant was an imposter trying to poison passengers through the beverage service. He demanded to see everyone's airline employee credentials and refused to let anyone serve drinks until their real identities could be verified. Security had to remove him while he shouted warnings to other passengers about the fake flight crew conspiracy. 4. A passenger tried to charge her phone by sticking the charger cord directly into the airplane's oxygen mask outlet, genuinely believing it was an electrical port. When this didn't work, she began dismantling her seat's armrest, looking for hidden outlets, and created a small electrical fire that required the plane to make an emergency landing for safety inspections. 5. A woman refused to sit down during takeoff because she was waiting for the airplane to level out first, and didn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal about sitting during the most turbulent part of flight. She spent 20 minutes walking up and down the aisle while the plane tried to taxi, forcing delays until she could be convinced that sitting was actually safer during takeoff than standing. 6. A man brought a full Thanksgiving dinner on board, including a whole turkey, mashed potatoes, and gravy, planning to eat properly during his cross-country flight. The smell overwhelmed the cabin. The gravy spilled during turbulence, and several passengers with food allergies had reactions to the airborne particles. The flight was delayed for cleaning and medical attention. 7. A passenger became convinced that the airplane's safety demonstration was government propaganda and began loudly providing his own alternative safety instructions to nearby passengers. He demonstrated real emergency procedures that contradicted everything the flight crew said, causing mass confusion and requiring security to remove him before other passengers could be influenced by his dangerous misinformation. 8. A woman tried to live stream her entire flight on social media, including detailed commentary about other passengers, crew members, and airline security procedures. When asked to stop filming other people without permission, she argued that airplanes were public space, and everyone had consented to be filmed by flying. The flight was delayed while lawyers determined privacy violations. 9. A man refused to turn off his Bluetooth speaker, which was playing death metal at maximum volume, because he claimed he had audio processing disorder and needed his music to function properly. When flight attendants explained that headphones were required, he argued that wireless headphones would interfere with his brainwaves, and the flight was delayed until he could be removed. 10. A passenger brought her own folding chair on board because she didn't trust airplane seats and wanted to sit in something more stable. She set up her lawn chair in the aisle and refused to use her assigned seat, blocking emergency exits and creating safety violations that required ground crew to physically remove both her and her furniture before takeoff could proceed. 11. A woman became hysterical when she realized her connecting flight was at a different gate, convinced that this meant she was being trafficked, and that gate changes were code for passenger kidnapping. She called 911 from the plane and demanded FBI intervention, holding up the flight for 3 hours while authorities explained how airport layouts work and confirmed she wasn't being abducted. 12. A man tried to upgrade himself to first class by moving seats during flight, arguing that empty seats should be first come, first served, and refusing to understand why seat assignments mattered. When flight attendants tried to move him back, he barricaded himself in the first-class bathroom and had to be coaxed out by airport security after landing. 13. A passenger brought a full-sized inflatable pool float, planning to use it as a more comfortable seat during her long flight. When informed that outside flotation devices weren't allowed, she attempted to inflate it in the aisle as a demonstration of its safety features, blocking passenger movement and creating chaos that delayed takeoff for an hour. 14. A woman refused to stow her lucky fishing rod because she was convinced that separating from it would cause the plane to crash. She held the 6-foot rod across multiple seats, insisted it was a religious artifact, and created a safety hazard that required crew to explain the difference between emotional attachment and aviation regulations before she could be removed. 15. A man became convinced that airplane food was irradiated with mind control chemicals and began warning other passengers not to eat anything served by the crew. He brought his own detector equipment, a random electronic device, and walked the aisles testing people's meals for government additives, causing mass confusion and requiring psychological evaluation. 16. A passenger tried to open the emergency exit window because she wanted to take pictures of the clouds from outside and couldn't understand why the windows were sealed shut. Flight attendants had to explain multiple times that opening windows at 30,000 feet would kill everyone, but she remained convinced they were exaggerating for liability reasons. 17. A woman brought her own extension cord and attempted to plug it into various airplane outlets to create a charging station for her multiple devices. When this didn't work, she began rewiring seat electronics with tools from her carry-on, creating electrical hazards that required emergency maintenance and delayed the flight for safety inspections. 18. A man refused to wear shoes on the airplane because he practiced natural grounding and needed to maintain connection with Earth energy. His feet were so dirty they left marks on seats and surfaces, creating health code violations that required professional cleaning before the next flight could board. 19. A passenger became convinced that turbulence was caused by other passengers moving around too much, and began policing everyone's movement, demanding they sit perfectly still to keep the airplane stable. She created more disruption trying to control other passengers than any natural turbulence would cause, and had to be restrained by crew. 20. A woman tried to conduct a full business meeting via speakerphone during flight, complete with PowerPoint presentations displayed on her laptop screen for nearby passengers to participate in. When asked to use headphones, she argued that her meeting was more important than flight regulations, and the call was delayed until she could be convinced to use private audio. 21. A man brought his own oxygen tank because he didn't trust airline air quality and began sharing his pure oxygen with other passengers who he determined looked like they needed it. The unauthorized medical equipment created safety hazards and potential liability issues that required emergency evaluation by medical personnel. 22. A passenger tried to tip the flight attendants with live goldfish she'd brought in her carry-on bag, convinced that living gifts were more meaningful than money. The fish violated multiple health and safety regulations, and the flight was delayed while animal control determined how to safely remove aquatic stowaways from the aircraft. 23. A woman refused to sit in her assigned seat because the number contained negative energy and demanded to be moved to a seat that aligned with her spiritual frequency. She brought crystals and incense to cleanse her preferred seat, creating fire hazards and disrupting other passengers with unauthorized burning materials. 24. A man became convinced that airplane Wi-Fi was scrambling his brainwaves and began disconnecting other passengers' devices for their own safety. He crawled under seats trying to disable electronics and created chaos while explaining his theories about digital mind control to confused travelers. 25. A passenger brought her own tent and attempted to set it up around her seat for privacy and security during the flight. The fabric blocked emergency equipment and created safety violations, but she insisted that personal shelter was a constitutional right that airlines couldn't regulate. 26. A woman tried to bring her therapy llama on board, complete with documentation she'd created herself, declaring the animal a certified emotional support livestock. When informed that llamas weren't approved for cabin travel, she argued that size discrimination against large therapy animals was illegal and demanded accommodation for her medical equipment. 27. A man refused to turn off his phone during takeoff because he was expecting an important call and didn't believe that phone signals could interfere with airplane navigation. He hid his phone in various locations around his seat and continued taking calls while crew searched for the source of electronic interference that was affecting flight instruments. 28. A passenger became hysterical when she realized the airplane bathroom didn't have a window, convinced that windowless rooms meant she was being imprisoned. She refused to use the facilities and demanded that the plane land immediately so she could use a bathroom with natural light and escape routes. 29. A woman brought her own megaphone on board to ensure clear communication with flight attendants and began making announcements to other passengers about proper airline etiquette. Her amplified instructions created noise violations and confusion until crew could confiscate her unauthorized broadcasting equipment. 30. A man tried to rearrange the airplane seating configuration because he believed the current layout was aerodynamically inefficient and was causing unnecessary fuel consumption. He began physically moving seats and explaining his engineering theories to confused passengers until security could restore the original cabin configuration. 31. A passenger brought a full camping stove on board, planning to cook fresh meals during her long international flight because she didn't trust airline food preparation standards. The open flame created immediate safety hazards and required hazmat evaluation of her carry-on luggage for additional dangerous materials. 32. A woman refused to fasten her seatbelt because she had claustrophobia about restraints and began teaching other passengers alternative safety techniques that she'd invented herself. Her unauthorized safety demonstration contradicted actual emergency procedures and created dangerous confusion about real evacuation protocols. 33. A man became convinced that the airplane's route was wrong and began providing navigation assistance to the flight crew using his smartphone GPS. He demanded course corrections based on his calculations and argued with pilots about more efficient flight paths until he could be removed from the cockpit area. 34. A passenger tried to start a prayer circle during turbulence, moving through the cabin and insisting that other passengers join hands to spiritually stabilize the aircraft. Her religious coordination efforts created more chaos than the actual weather conditions and required crew intervention to restore order. 35. A woman brought her own lighting equipment because airplane cabin lighting was insufficient for her skin condition and began setting up professional photography lights around her seat. The bright illumination disrupted other passengers and created electrical overload issues that required maintenance evaluation. 36. A man refused to use the airplane bathroom because he believed airplane waste systems were connected to government surveillance networks and demanded that the plane land so he could use unsupervised facilities. His bathroom conspiracy theories lasted for 6 hours until he could be convinced otherwise. 37. A passenger brought her own air fresheners and began spraying aromatherapy treatments throughout the cabin to improve everyone's travel experience. The chemical aerosols triggered allergic reactions in multiple passengers and required medical attention for respiratory distress caused by unauthorized air quality modifications. 38. A woman became convinced that airplane food was expired and began conducting her own freshness test on other passengers' meals using a thermometer and pH strips she'd brought in her carry-on. Her food safety inspections created more concern than any actual food quality issues and required crew to explain airline food safety protocols. 39. A man tried to conduct a security audit of the airplane by testing emergency equipment, checking exit door mechanisms, and examining safety devices. His unauthorized security testing created actual safety hazards and required federal evaluation of potential terrorism concerns versus misguided passenger initiative. 40. A passenger brought her own interpreter because she didn't trust airline translation services for her English-speaking flight to an English-speaking destination. The unnecessary translator created confusion about actual communication needs and delayed boarding while crew determined what language services were actually required. 41. A woman refused to turn off her meditation app, which was playing loud nature sounds and guided meditation instructions, because stopping would interrupt her spiritual alignment. The audio disrupted the entire cabin and required negotiation about religious accommodation versus noise ordinances. 42. A man became convinced that airplane seats were ergonomically dangerous and began providing corrective positioning therapy to other passengers without their consent. His unauthorized medical assistance created liability issues and required actual medical evaluation of his chiropractic theories. 43. A passenger tried to redecorate her section of the cabin with personal artwork and fabric because the sterile environment was affecting her creativity. Her interior design modifications violated safety regulations and required restoration of original cabin configuration before takeoff could proceed. 44. A woman brought her own weather monitoring equipment because she didn't trust pilot weather reports and began providing accurate meteorological updates to nearby passengers. Her competing weather announcements contradicted official flight information and created unnecessary anxiety about actual flight conditions. 45. And finally, the most spectacularly disruptive passenger incident of all time. A man decided that airplane travel was unnatural and began conducting a primitive survival workshop during flight, teaching passengers how to survive aircraft emergencies using Stone Age techniques. He brought flint, dried meat, and primitive tools in his carry-on, demonstrated fire-starting techniques in the aisle, and explained how to hunt for food if stranded in the wilderness after a crash. His survival education included rope-making demonstrations using airplane blankets, primitive navigation using star charts he'd drawn on napkins, and instructions for building shelters from airplane debris. The flight was diverted for an emergency landing when his flint demonstration created actual sparks near the oxygen masks, and he was arrested while still explaining to passengers how to fashion spears from airplane silverware for hunting wild game. These airplane passenger incidents prove that sometimes the biggest threats to safe air travel aren't mechanical failures. They're the people who thought 30,000 feet was perfect for survival workshops and business meetings. Which one of these incidents made you immediately choose train travel? Was it the emotional support peacock, the primitive survival workshop, or the passenger who tried to redecorate mid-flight? Drop a comment and tell us which passenger deserves to be permanently banned from air travel. And if you made it through this list without booking a road trip instead, hit that subscribe button for more stories that prove the journey can be more terrifying than the destination.